This short video is just to show you how you can use Microsoft Excel or a similar spreadsheet program to generate a Gantt chart. Now, you can do that with many other tools such as Microsoft Project or any of the online tools that are available, for example Smartsheet. However, for many practical purposes, a simple grid type approach actually does a lot of the things that you need it to do. So let's just work through that step by step. So I'm going to create a project with a couple of different objectives, and I'm just going to make it up as I go, and we will put it on a timeline that's going to be over a full year. Okay, so let's build our timeline first. So if I click into a cell and just type in Q1, Excel is smart enough to know it thinks I'm talking about quarters, so I can actually drag the quarters across very easily. So now I have 4 quarters. But I want to put months underneath those quarters as well, so I need to have a little bit of space between each one. So I'm just dragging them across so I have the right number of cells. And the reason for doing all of this is going to become apparent very quickly. So if I have January, February, March as part of my quarter 1, I can again use Excel Smarts to build that across into a full year. So here we have a full year and we have the quarters. Now, it's not perfect, but it will work so far, but I'm going to tidy it up a little bit. So I want to merge my quarter 1 so that it sits neatly over each of those. And I'm just clicking on the cells that I want to merge and merging them together. And just to make it very easy to see, I'm just going to put a little bit of color behind each one. You don't have to do this, but I'm doing it for the purposes of the video so that it's very obvious which ones that we're actually looking at any given time. Now, if you like, you could go in and have week 1, week 2, week 3, and week 4, and so on, and you can make it as detailed as you like, all the way down to day levels. However, you are getting a little bit then into the micromanagement type approach, and you may be going a little bit too far in how you're actually recording the different tasks as part of that overall project. So this is our overall time framework. It spans a year, so let's leave it sit at a year. And let's see if we can actually start to build certain things into this. Now, one of the things we do want to do is build in essentially our objectives, and we also want to build in our overall aim. We would like to build in something called a milestone, which is a significant piece of work that we've got done, and a deliverable as well, which is something that we can kind of tick off our to-do list, as it were. So let's start building in some objectives. I'm going to put my objectives directly next to my kind of time chart. And obviously we need to give that a bit of a bigger space because these are going to be quite descriptive. We might want to put in a number against them, just so that we can kind of have a fairly easy way to keep track of things. So obviously you're going to have to build in those objectives. Now, this Gantt chart discussion assumes that you've already done that planning to plan session and you're really getting into the proper breaking out the specific details of the project plan. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a project which is centered around developing a new genetic test for drug metabolizing enzyme polymorphisms. Okay, so a fairly generic type thing. It's a DNA technology. So let's kind of break that down into different sections. So if we're developing a test like that, one of the first things that we need to do is to identify the methodology. Now, is that sufficiently micromanaged or not? That depends, but I'm just going to leave it open as an identify the method. I'm going to optimize the molecular method. Now, you will note that I'm not assigning any times or anything like that yet, because I may move things around, to be honest, and that can be one of the reasons for the item numbers, because I'll show you a kind of a shortcut way of doing that in a second. Okay, so what we need to do, so we've identified the method we're going to use and the platform and so on. Let's put in platform just so that it's clear. We've optimized the method. We don't know how long that's going to take yet. We also need a population to test it on, so we need to recruit people. But as well as recruiting people to test, we also need to have permission to do so. So we might have regulatory things to go through, like ethics and so on. So let's just call it regulations. We will have to do some data analysis. Once we get the data, we will also have to define what normal looks like. So we might want to know what our normal population looks like. So let's say we define the normal frequencies of our polymorphisms in our population, and then we will write everything up. Now, as part of writing up the data, let's call it data/thesis. We might have to do a literature review, and we might have to also design primers if we're going to do a molecular test. So we might have to design the actual technique. So there we go, we have a bunch of different things, but they're not currently in the order that we want them to be in. So let's try and put numbers against them to order them. So maybe we start off with lit review. Maybe then we want to identify the method or the platform, because that's going to influence how we might design our primers. Then we will probably want to start going through the regulatory stuff at that stage, maybe even earlier, but let's call it number 4. We will probably then need to do the optimizing of the method with, sort of generic pools of DNA, for example. We'll then need to actually recruit people to test. We will have to then actually do the test. We haven't noted anywhere that we'll do it, so we need to carry out the study. So that's going to be point number 7. Then we're going to do the data analysis, that's 8. We'll define our normal frequencies, that's 9. And then we'll write up our thesis, that's 10. Now, they're all over the place, so that's not an easy way to actually organize it so far, but we can actually get around that. So if we highlight the entire region, and then holding down Control and Shift together, we press the letter L. We've switched on the filtering process. So very easily now, what I will do is I can actually pick smallest to largest. And what this filter will do is it will filter the rows, so it keeps everything the same on the row. So I'm going to go smallest to largest, and now you see all of the numbers have been lined up and it's been organized in the way that we want it to be organized. So now we actually have the start of what looks like a reasonable layout for the project. And we do have the little arrows, we can get rid of those later, don't worry about it. So very, very simply, you can just block in color, okay, so I'm just going to use pieces of color, how long that activity is going to take. So a handy tip is if you copy a cell that has a color in it, you can paste it somewhere else easily, okay? So I'm going to say maybe my lit review is going to take me 2 months. Identifying the platform will take me 1 month, because that's not such a big deal. Designing my primers and my technique, that's possibly going to take me at least a month. Regulations probably will take me a couple of months, so I'm going to start that a little bit earlier. And you'll see they don't have to follow one after the other in every case. I'm going to optimize my molecular method, so that's coming as soon as I've done my technique. I can only recruit people once I've finished the regs. I will spend a couple of months in the summer and early autumn carrying out my study. I will do my data analysis then towards the tail end of the study. I'll have my normal frequencies, and then I'm going to focus some time at the very end for finalizing the thesis, but I will also be able to write up parts of my thesis when I have optimized my method, when I have recruited my participants, and so on. So I don't have to wait until the very end to do all of my thesis work. So now what we have is a very rough layout of a plan. And that rough layout is essentially going to be our Gantt chart. So that has got our objectives. Now, to make this easier to see, what you can actually do is just put in the grid behind it. Okay, so now we can clearly see what's going on. I'm going to highlight everything and do my Control-Shift-L again to get rid of those arrows. And just to make it look a bit nicer, I'm going to drag everything in. Okay, so I can see what I've got on each particular section. I have a plan, and that's the key part, and that's really what this is about. We're defining a plan. Now we might want to put in some key parts, so we might want to put in a milestone, so some place where I can go and celebrate that I've completed something. So for example, when I've optimized my method and I'm finished optimizing my method, I might actually think that's worth celebrating. When I've got my regulations finished and have my ethics completed, that might be something to celebrate. Where I've completed the study, so if we're going to do the study in July, August and September, we should be completed at the end of September. So that's a milestone. I have completed the study. So we can use the same approach to deal with milestones. So we can have one milestone which is ethical approval granted, method optimized, and the last one is data study complete. So now you have three kind of key milestones, which will give deliverables for us as well, because when the study is complete we will have a deliverable of a bunch of data that is yet to be analysed, but we will have it. And then the last one is going to be thesis submitted. Now these can be put in at the relevant times, again just using a different colour if you like. Okay, so it's a very similar principle. You can just put those in. An option that some people use to do that is to sort of borrow the symbols that are used in the kind of the official project management programs, and either use a shape, which is a little diamond is typically what's used, and put in a diamond at the time when their milestone is going to happen. So I'm going to put a little diamond in there and I'm going to fill it in bright orange. So there we have a little milestone at the end of the molecular method, which corresponds to this one. It can be a little bit neater to do it in this way because it shows where they fit in. Now this is a very entry-level approach to doing it. It doesn't have all of the bells and whistles of something like Microsoft Project, but it captures the key planning part, which is really what you want to capture here.